Forum Borealis Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north and welcome to the forum and a new show in our Polar Mystery series. Folks, today you will get your paradigm properly challenged. Now, before you conclude that we've fallen into the abyss of lunacy, let me remind you that any theory that can be argued consistently, point to evidence, and find room within established facts without having to turn everything upside down must be researched with a scientifically investigative mind. Otherwise, we're mistaking reason for emotionally based bias. Maybe surprisingly, but unlike the flat earth theory, the hollow earth theory actually has several things going for it. Naturally, this doesn't mean that it's correct, but we will never know unless we bother to explore it and try to falsify or verify it. Luckily for us, someone bothers. That's our guest tonight, who will help us understand this theory, for it is a theory and not a mere hypothesis, and as an intellectual exercise, go through the main points to see how it holds up. Of course, even if we adopt this as a new model of our Earth, we cannot know for sure, no matter how convincing it seems. Only boots on the ground research will reveal the truth, and again, our guest may very well be that person. I'm referring to the 7-time Amazon best-selling author and renowned public speaker Dr. Brooks Alexander Agnew. He's one of those guests where the CV is so large that it cannot be properly accounted for even in our meticulous presentations. So, I will give you the highlights here, and the remaining details will be put up at his presentation page on our website when we finally get around to it. Our guest descends from the Agnew and Ross clans of ancient Scotland, who shared the defence of Roslin and the region of Galloway. He was born in 1955, raised in Pasadena, California as the son of a NASA contract engineer, where he spent his youth hanging around Caltech and Jet Propulsion Labs, where his early interest in space exploration inspired him. He was assisting with lab research at UCLA's Brain Research Institute at age 16. Agnew entered the Air Force in 1973. In 1974, he graduated second in his electrical engineering class at Community College of the Air Force Associates as a precision measuring equipment laboratory specialist. After earning an honorable discharge, he began his studies at University of North Dakota, continued in 1975 to Brigham Young University, then to Western Kentucky University, and finally to Tennessee Technological University, where he in 1994 received his bachelor's in chemistry and mathematics, when graduating with honors in the top 0.1% of senior graduates. In 1998, he got his master's degree in quality management and statistics from Kennedy Western University. In 2000, he completed courses for doctorate in physics and was awarded his PhD with honors through Tennessee Technological University and with advanced degrees in quality and physics from extension universities with disruptive manufacturing and energy technologies and earth tomography. He also graduated first in his class and gave its valedictorian for entrepreneurial studies at the Tennessee Tech School of Business. With a rank of 6 Sigma black belts, Dr. Agnew is a certified quality engineer and a multi-patented. For instance, he's been a successful pioneer with inventing mobile gamma quadrupole spectroscopy and also ground probing radar, which is currently utilized in the Mars Express program. He designed the VMC drive system and produced the world's first DOT-approved light electric truck, launching the first continuous manufacturing system for biodiesel from oil seeds, and later designing an Algier biodiesel production facility for the Department of Energy. Indeed, he holds numerous patents, trade secrets, and proprietary knowledge in several industries, including chemistry, chemical engineering, subspace communications, electrical vehicle technology, architecture, and financial instruments for securitization. He has authored thousands of technical and scientific papers, booklets, and documentaries. Brooks Agnew has worked as instructor of mathematics at Gaston College, professorial assistant with environmental chemistry at Tennessee Technological University, and instructed graduate students at Western Kentucky University in the field of instrumental analysis. He is a multilingual fellow of the School of Science and Design Innovation at New Earth University. His professional career as a commercial scientist with numerous Fortune 100 companies includes more than 5 years in oil and gas exploration and 25 years in the manufacturing industry. He was consultant to Toyota, General Motors, Chrysler, and Nissan, but eventually retired from full-time employment as an engineer for the automotive industry when, in 2009, after founding his own EV company, where he currently is CEO, and has worked tirelessly to create affordable, clean, and renewable energy. He is a member of American Chemical Society, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, Scoutmaster with Boy Scouts of America, IEEE Remote Sensing Society, Mensa, American Society for Certified Quality Engineers, Society of Automotive Engineering, a chairman of construction for Hamblen County Habitat of Humanity, and has cooperated with Pure Energy Systems, New Energy Congress, and the Global Breakthrough Energy Movement, and has been a public speaker at numerous conferences and scientific documentaries, notwithstanding as an HARP expert scientist. In media, he's been featured in programs such as the documentary on HARP called Holes in Heaven, Lost Lightning, The Missing Secrets of Nikola Tesla, Joe Rogan Questions Everything, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura, Watchers 9, Phenomenon The Lost Archives, Watchers 5 Let Me In, to name some, and has appeared at History Channel, Discovery Channel, Science Channel, True TV, National Geographic, etc., as well as hundreds of radio programs and podcasts. Indeed, he hosts his own radio show called X Squared Radio every Sunday for the last 14 years, where he speaks with top authorities on the mysteries of the Earth and universe. With a #1 bestseller, Brooks Agnew is author of 10 non-fiction books on topics such as spirituality, science, and politics, challenging the foundations of science and religion. He believes in the unlimited potential of mankind and is supportive of community ideas that work together in a sustainable manner. He currently resides with his family in North Carolina, whence he travels the world teaching, consulting, and lecturing. But more than anything, Brooks is a Renaissance man with a passion for discovery. One of the most interesting projects he's involved with is the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition, where he is scientific project director. And since the adventurer Steve Curry suddenly died right before their 2006 venture, Brooks replaced him as expedition leader. He is the right man at the right time, as he for decades has explored to scientifically investigate clues if Earth might have developed as a hollow sphere. The evidence leaves in question its true planetary core geology. NPIEE aimed to raise funds for a scientific research expedition to the pole to discover if a certain region above the Arctic Circle has an oceanic depression or entrance into the hollow center of the Earth. This is by far the most innovative and courageous exploration effort in modern times, when we have ceased moon landings and are years away from manned explorations to Mars, this expedition is possible and within reach. It's just a question of finances. If they succeed, the world's largest nuclear icebreaker will host a team of 100 scientists, teachers, filmmakers, going further than anyone ever has into the Arctic ice, documented as a major TV series that will reveal to millions who follow this project what is the true nature of this age-old mystery. The science is ready, the public is receptive, the mission is extraordinary and bold enough to make history. Welcome to Forum Borealis, Brooks.
Thank you so much, Al. How are you?
Now, I'm very, very excellent because I've been ever since we started this show, I've been having in the back of my head that at some point we gotta cover this subject and we gotta do it with you. But alas, it's been a very hard way getting you on. And it's not just your fault. I mean, we've had some misunderstandings with timing and all that. But you know, I think it worked very well because we've massaged people, like you know, I've told you about this Antarctica show we had with Mr. Cliffy. Okay. And we kind of prepared the ground for what we're going to do today. And I have to say, people, you know, most of the listeners, you know this, that in this show, we're not here to shovel our opinion down your throats. We're here to help you, educate you about what's out there. We're here to entertain scenarios intellectually. We're here to broaden our mind and indeed our paradigm. And I think we're really pushing it for many people. Many people will think today when they hear this topic, they will think, oh man, they've really gone off the deep end now. But I implore you guys to, you know, just sit in for the ride and listen. If you don't agree with the things we're going to touch upon today, that's fine. At least you are more educated. And another thing, you better hope that the hollow earth theory, because it's a theory, not just a hypothesis, you better hope it will catch on, because it will be the best antidote out there to the flat earth. The flat earth is having a field day with all the mysteries regarding, for example, the poles. And I think the hollow earth will be the best. You know, Brooks, I usually say that the flat earth is a distraction from the hollow earth.
Well, it could be. I don't have much to say about the flat earth. Once I got past 6th grade mathematics, pretty much made the flat earth impossible.
Yeah, and for me, when I reincarnated myself away from the medieval ages, that's when I scrapped that paradigm. And I also used to say that the ancient aliens, although I don't reject that there may have been such a thing, but you know, the tendency to explain everything with aliens is a distraction from the ancient antediluvian civilization, human civilization. And indeed, I also think that the we never went to the moon meme is a distraction from the secret space program.
Excellent.
So I think there's here in our show, we do acknowledge all these mysteries, but we are not fan of all the explanations out there. But Hollow Earth, I could think of no better chap to cover that with than you. And I think we should start, because unlike the Flat Earth, the Hollow Earth has an historic case for it. Yep. In fact, you find it all over the world and very far back in time. So maybe we should start there, Brooks. What do you think?
Sure. When we started doing our research for the first book of the Arc of Millions of Years series in 2001, which goes back a long way, but it took about 3 years to gather enough information to publish that first book. And mind you, we'd never written a book before, so this was a totally nonfiction book. It had hundreds and hundreds of footnotes and references and photographs and graphs and quotations, and we took 44 of the ancient writings from ancient civilizations going back 5,000 years. Wow. Babylonian and Mayan and Toltec and Olmec and just unbelievable. Even early American Indian theories and ideas that came forward, and every single one of these ancient societies talked about very plainly in their ideology. Some of them you could call a religion. Some of them were more philosophy and historical viewpoints.
Yeah.
They talked about a life force coming out of the center of the earth, or the inside of the earth. That the earth itself was not just this lump of molten rock floating through space. For them, it was a living thing. It had its own will. It had its agreeable days and its disagreeable days. And the interesting thing is, it's not all just superstition. It's not like, oh, we have to go please the volcano god, the virgin today. No, they had, amazingly enough, they had a good understanding of planetary systems.
Yeah.
A good understanding of what a star was, what a sun was, how planets revolved around stars in orbits. And not all of these solar systems that we can see records of had 9 planets. Some of them 8, some had 11, some had 13. And the amazing thing is that even some of the star formations that it looked like some of the, we could call them the shining ones, we can call them fallen angels. There are all kinds of names for them, different societies. But they were teaching the human race about elaborate star systems and gravitational systems that aren't from around here. We don't even know where they are. We suspect maybe somewhere in what we call the Summer Triangle, which is kind of hemmed in on the 3 apexes by the Cygnus star system, which includes Sirius A and Sirius B out that way, and then Alpha Centauri or Vega, and like that. So you have this large triangle of stars. We call it a triangle from here. That's our perspective of it. But the interesting thing is, it's not just the advanced civilizations like the Babylonians or the Egyptians or even the Mayans, which had a very common... And
Tibetans, mind you.
Yeah, the Tibetans. Well, I'll talk about them in a moment. But
okay,
they came a little later, back around 3,000 to 3,500 to 4,500 years. These advanced civilizations that had advanced knowledge of astronomy, of cosmology, they understood the motion of planets, which is difficult to do. I mean, it doesn't appear as though they had the mathematical systems in place in their culture to be able to understand those kinds of things. What it appears is that they were taught these things by someone else, someone who did have that knowledge, someone who maybe, came from that area, or maybe even from an ancient civilization that knew this, and they got wiped out and their knowledge was passed forward. I mean, I'm talking going back maybe 500,000 years or 3 million years. These old civilizations that left complex record behind that was recovered by a post, what we would call a modern historian, say 3,800 years ago. And then they learned from those records and created their own history.
Yeah. Are you when you start talking millions, then I have to ask you, are you familiar with the exploded planet hypothesis and Dr. Oh, what's his name again? Oh, we've covered him in a show recently called Ancient War in Heaven, but it's this prominent American scientist. He died not so many years ago, and he launched this, I would say discoveries is the best word actually, that all the comets and meteorites origin from the same point, namely the planet. Well, now it's just Ceres, it's just a chunk of it, but it's the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And that would have to have happened some millions years ago. I think it's either 3 or 25. But are you aware who I'm talking about at all?
Well, I'm familiar with Immanuel Velikovsky, and then
It's not him though.
With Michael Cremo, who wrote a book called Forbidden Archaeology. There's archaeology is the study of ancient science, but also or ancient civilizations, but also it kind of runs up against anthropology, which is the study of ancient civilizations. And the conflict that they normally have is archaeology has a tendency to lean on geologists. Like a geologist will say, well, this clay sediment right here, this clay sediment is 500,000 years old because we know the layers above it. And we know generally, here's an area where there was massive flooding, where there was massive ice age. And so we know that this sedimentary layer here is 500,000 years old. And right in the middle of this undisturbed sedimentary layer is a skeleton of a man.
Yeah.
So we say to ourselves, okay, well, is that man, according to the archaeologists, 10,000 years old? Or according to the geologists, is he 500,000 years old? You see, this is where these sciences kind of run up against each other and have a conflict based upon the way that they extrapolate their science. And that is really, really important because we have basically two core philosophies that go behind all these sciences. One is called humanism. And in humanism, the way we look at science, we look at it as a system, as a process, as a total system. For instance, we could go to a kitchen sink where we see a graduated cylinder sitting under the faucet and the faucet is dripping and the graduated cylinder is half full. And so we pull out our trusty calibrated stopwatch and we count the number of drops that are dripping every minute. And we do this for 5 minutes and then we extrapolate. We go backwards in time and say, aha, I know how long that graduated cylinder has been sitting in that sink. And that's humanism. They say that the forces and energies that are working on our world today are the same forces and the same energies that have always worked on it. And so we can just use a small snapshot of 1 or 2 lifetimes here on this planet, and we can extrapolate back millions of years.
They're just interpreting and then projecting, if you ask me.
Yes, they are interpolating, or they are what we call extrapolating. They basically are taking a 12-inch ruler, and they're putting their eye down next to it and looking out 20,000 miles. This is how they measure distance, which is fine because that's all they have. But the other philosophy, and this is really important to note, the other philosophy, for lack of a better term, we call it catastrophism.
Yeah.
That is that we have the same kitchen sink, we have the same graduated cylinder, we have the same dripping water. But what we take into consideration is before you got there with your trusty calibrated stopwatch, someone was in the kitchen and was running the faucet and then shut it off and left the room and left it dripping. And so actually the faucet's only been there for a few minutes, not really several hours, like you're saying, because actually the energies and forces that are working upon our environment right now are radically different than the ones that worked on it thousands or tens of thousands or millions of years ago. So you take into consideration this core philosophy, and it affects the way a scientist looks at hypothesis, how he puts together an experiment, and what weight he puts on those experiments. We have errors that we in our viewpoint.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There's something wrong with the sound. You're coming and going.
Oh.
I think let's hang up and call back, okay?
No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to hear me fine.
Yep, I'm hearing you fine now.
Okay. I don't know what happened. There's hardly anyone in this building, so I'm the only person drawing on this internet, so it should be.
Same here. let's hope it's the powers that be, because then they're actually giving us confirmation that we're onto something here.
Well, we haven't got good stuff yet. I'm just laying the foundation.
I know. They're already getting their feet cold. By the way, the scientist I tried to remember was Tom van Flandern. You should really look into him. You'll love him.
I know Tom. Yeah.
Oh, you knew it. Yeah, there you go. Right?
Last guys to interview him before he passed away.
Oh, wow.
He was very, very brilliant and very well-published astronomer, actually.
Yep.
Tom van Flandern. He was he supported the idea of hollow Earth theory.
Publicly or you know?
Yes, publicly. He did it on my program too.
Oh, wow.
He wrote a great book, a huge book, and actually very well written. So he's, normally astronomers, they don't talk much. In fact, you don't really get to see their faces much because every time I go out with astronomers on a dark sky event, we never turn the lights on, so we don't know what we look like. We know what we sound like, but we don't know what we look like. But I really like Tom. Tom was a great guy.
Died much too soon.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did, because we really need his intellect and his open mind now.
Yeah.
So the story goes that, we approached all of this ancient science with an open mind. In a catastrophism kind of way. And somebody along, this line handed me a book about the hollow Earth as I was doing my research for the Ark of Millions of Years. And it kind of threw me off a little bit. I read it and I thought, oh boy, that's really amusing. And so I put it up on the shelf and I stayed with the ancient stuff. And we really didn't address it for probably 1,500 pages or so in our work. And then as we were producing volume 2 and then volume 3, it took a number of years to write all of this, 2,000 pages worth.
Wow.
More experiments were being done. They were spending a lot of money on satellites, on different kinds of space experiments, oceanographic experiments, seismographic experiments. First of all, the fact that they were running the experiments was suspicious to me. Thought we already knew all this stuff. Why are we spending all this money to gather this data? But then the data started coming back from the experiments. And every single time we got the information back from these experiments, it seemed to throw into doubt the way we always thought our planet was made, or at least modern science. We thought we lived on this big, molten ball of rock floating through space, and every once in a while, crust would move around a little bit, and we'd have some volcano or an earthquake or whatever. And that's the way we thought our planet was made. And we began to see hard evidence that not only threw that into doubt, but started to support some of these ancient ideas that there's kind of life force that is supplied to life, to living things on this planet, coming from inside the planet. And when we get to the scientific portion of this, I'll share some of that information with you because it's quite stunning.
Just a little I have registered is mind-blowing, because sometimes it points in a direction where you just don't have any other options than to conclude. But I just want to say before we move on, since you're talking about how we encounter these things, many of my listeners regard me as a relatively rational guy, as rational, I guess, as you can be regarded when you are, flirting with woo and alternative stuff. But for me, it was kind of similar, but I'm a collector of esoteric stuff, and I've been delving into especially Western esotericism, but I've been looking for archives of mystery schools, and I've found there's so many in the past that's died out, and then that stuff often ends up in second-hand market, and I started to notice a pattern. And that was that many of the old mystery schools had one thing in common. Well, they had several, but especially one that surprised me. And that was that in their high degrees, in their innermost classes, They were talking about the hollow earth.
That's great.
And the first time I encountered it, I thought that was just like a curiosity. But then I saw different traditions who's not even related. And then I had to start taking notes, right? And so that was very interesting. And I see also that, like you say, the scientific stuff kind of corroborates the ancient stuff. And also another point is that many of these ancients, they were very specific about the knowledge. They had incredibly detailed knowledge about, some things that you thought they shouldn't have.
Yep.
So why would they, when it comes to the hollow earth, suddenly start to be poetic and take interpretational license? In fact, I think that the only place where you can kind of think that's what's going on is in Christianity, which is a very young and a copycat religion, also to a far extent many of the things they had from others. And I think that when they talk about hell being in the center of the earth, I think that's a degenerative kind of reflection of an original science. But otherwise, I think the ancients were right on the money.
Well, you really raised some great points there, because that is exactly what a lot of these ancient civilizations did. For most religions, most traditions that we see that have established themselves in history and developed a rather large following, they're usually started by some charismatic, some guy who was really good at the language and really brilliant as far as being able to discern the thoughts of others, by the tone of their voice or the look of their face. And so he was able to garner great power and have people that followed him for sometimes centuries. But when these ancient traditions where they're talking about planets, or they're talking about, for instance, a great flood, there's no charismatic. There's no, the word according to this prophet or that prophet. There's no one being that you can point to that leads you in the right direction or leads you in that direction. Instead, what you see is a plethora of evidence. You see Babylonian scrolls with solar systems and the sizes of the planets and the distances of their orbits according to size. You see things that relate to, especially if you go to Egypt, you go to Dendera, you go to Abydos, you see these elaborate drawings of the movement of energy from one being to another, or from an object to people, or from people to an object. And it's always related to earth energy. They do talk about an underworld. They talk about a river. But honestly, I look at some of everything from their boats that they have to the Osiris device that's in Abydos. They don't look like boats to me. They look like wormholes. They look exactly like Einstein-Rosen bridges that, in physics class that we learned from Einstein and Rosen and Planck. And, we learned this from them, that great gravitational forces that are concentrated in small areas in space have a tendency to bend space-time. They warp space-time. They pull the fabric of the universe down to a small area, sort of like rolling a heavy bowling ball in a bed sheet that's held very tightly by four people.
And popularized, through the Stargate universe movies.
Yeah. And
kind of like that.
We don't really know about that. We have some thought experiments that some of my colleagues have proposed, and we do respond back to those thought experiments with our own ideas. Some of them are confrontational. Some of them are an alternative. But one of the thought experiments is that there is a structure in the universe called a black hole. And this black hole is formed when so much matter occupies such a small space that the gravitational pull is so strong that even photons of light cannot escape. Up until a couple of years ago, maybe not that long, maybe only a year ago. These structures were highly theoretical. We just were running the standard model. We were putting enough energy and enough mass into the standard model. We kept coming up with this structure called black holes. Maxwell, Clerk, and others were great mathematicians, or a lot of physicists are not great mathematicians. They're great thinkers. They're great theorists, but they're not great mathematicians. But Clerk Maxwell was a great mathematician, and he proved, at least mathematically, that black holes have three properties about them. Number one is they're spinning at their maximum possible speed because they're conserving momentum, and the way the equation is, everything is maxed out. It's the maximum amount of matter in the smallest amount of space, and so therefore it's spinning as fast as it can possibly spin. Also that what they used to say, black holes have no hair. That is to say, there's no mountains on them. There's no fingers sticking out. They're smooth and they're round. But one of the other things that came out in this is that they're not necessarily spherical. Because, yes, they're round, but they're not necessarily spherical because they're spinning so fast. Heisenberg and others, and I mean, not alone because a lot of us have written papers on this now, we surmise that you can't locate the singularity behind the event horizon. You can't tell how fast it's going, and you can't locate it. So that means that it obeys a Heisenberg uncertainty. That is to say, we don't know its exact location or its exact speed. So therefore, it's a probability. And this probability leads us to believe that black holes actually flatten out a little bit, like galaxies. They have a hump in the middle, which is where most of the energy is, but then they create this disk that goes out 50, 80, 100, 10,000 light years. And that is actually the driving gravitational energy for all of the light in that galaxy. It's a really fascinating theory, and most of the galaxies do exhibit that kind of structure. Now, there are two observatories in the United States. One's in Hanford, Washington. The other's in Livingston, Louisiana. They're called the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatories. They go by the acronym LIGO, or LIGO if you want. And basically these are giant framing squares, interferometers that are made out of laser beams that go down at right angles to one another down these huge vacuum tunnels. It takes weeks to evacuate all the air out of these things. And Dr. Kip Thorne originally came up with the idea. Stephen Hawking supported it. Somehow they were able to go to the government, get a grant, and they built two of these things decades ago. And, you think, well, okay, we build it, we run it, all right, we take the measurement, it's great. But no, there were so many technological challenges to this. First of all, the wavelength of the light had to be regulated to within a fraction of a wavelength, a fraction of a single wavelength. Then the mirrors had to be designed. They had to be super flat, less than an atom of variation across the surface of the mirror. The mirror had to be hung on a weight, and then that weight hung by a piano wire so that the Earth's vibration wouldn't transfer to the mirror. And then they had to be able to synchronize these two interferometers, one way up in Washington and the other way down in Louisiana. And that took not only high-speed internet, but it took high-speed switching for the servers and the computers. They have the fastest computers in the world, faster than Wall Street. And that's super top secret. I mean, if you had access to these computers, you could actually get a view into the future of trading. You could make yourself the richest man in the world with these computers. That's how powerful they are. Last year, they were able to synchronize the two interferometers so they could triangulate. That is to say, they use the curvature of the Earth so that each observatory is looking to a different corner of space. And when a gravitational wave came through our neck of the woods and warped space-time, and these interferometers picked up that vibration, they were able to locate a black hole for the first time ever last year. Those
hard evidence.
They're all going to win the Nobel Prize. There's no question about it. It's the first time a black hole's ever really been, I want to use the word seen, but directly detected.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing, because what that does, it tells us that Stephen Hawking's original thought experiment that some matter, some mass from our universe is leaking into another universe. He published the paper, and I don't want to go into the thought experiment because it'll put everybody to sleep, but is that some matter, when it gets close to these black holes, it clones itself, and one of those clones falls into the black hole and ends up going to someplace else, some other universe, some other dimension.
Well, according to the Einstein-Rosen theory, the quasars, I think, were the if the black holes are the entrances, then the opposite, the doors out would be the quasars. But I'm not sure. Maybe the black holes are entrances to other dimensions, and the quasars are entrances from other dimensions. Maybe that's how they were thinking.
Hard to say.
Yeah.
I know quasars are the largest visible structures in our universe, the largest ones we've ever observed.
And they pump out a lot of energy, right?
Well, they do. These electrojets are amazing. They're pretty close to the speed of light, and so much mass, so much energy and mass pours out of these things. And we look at these structures, these quasars, and smaller things, which we call accretion disks, and we're sort of saying this is the way solar systems are formed. This is the way oxygen and silicon and carbon and all these things are being formed by these stars and these quasars. They're pumping elements into our atmosphere. But the most remarkable thing is I was at the observatory in Washington with a friend, and we were talking with Dr. Fred Raab. His name is spelled R-A-A-B. And we're just having a conversation because the presentation is over, and we're kind of, just having an interesting conversation. And he says, we're seeing particles pop into our dimension from another dimension.
Jeez.
And I said, what? What? He said, We're seeing particles pop into our dimension from another dimension with this instrument. Now, this is a government-funded observatory. It's our tax dollars, so you could go there. I don't know if you'd understand what was going on, but it's pretty cool. But if you know what's going on, you can ask very high-level questions, and that's where we were. So he volunteers this information, and what it did, it validated Stephen Hawking's assertion that part of our universe is leaking into another universe, but it opened a window into the idea that other universes are leaking into our universe. And it's usually doing it, we think it's doing it via these black holes or via these bridges that are built by these anomalies in gravitation.
But did the ancients have concepts of these things too?
Yes, they did. As a matter of fact, we went to the Mexico City Museum of Anthropology, and it's a fascinating museum. If you get a chance to go to Mexico City, please don't pass up this museum. Spend a day there if you can. But I go down, and they have this this structure, this thing that was carved out of stone 1,200 years ago. That's a long time ago. 1,200 years ago, and it looks artistic. It looks really great, but you know what it looks like, Al? It looks just like a rotating black hole. And the interesting thing is, you could see planets going through this portal from one side to the other. Planets, not just particles, whole planets. And what it did, it supported the idea. If you go up to Genesis and you read it carefully as a scientist, you'll see that there are actually two creations. One is a planet that already exists. God goes down. He puts man and woman. He says, multiply and replenish the earth, till the earth, blah, 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 all that.
Yeah.
But the next creation, he starts from scratch. He goes to this water planet, and his spirit moves across the face of the deep, and he decides to divide the waters from the waters. He splits this water planet.
Yeah, Gospel of John now, isn't it?
No, this is Genesis.
Genesis, okay.
He splits this water planet, and then he moves them apart. He puts space, stars in between them.
Yeah.
Which means he's moving one of these planets. Now, he moves it for a long time because there's no such thing as night or day on this world for till the end of the third creative period, which it could be 3,000 years or 3 million years. We don't really know. He calls it a day, but what does that mean?
Yeah, like the Hindus said, the Brahmans' nights and days, that's a matter of million of years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this planet is moved, and it's moved according to the Mayans and according to the Babylonians. It's moved through the rift in the Milky Way. If you look at the Milky Way, you'll notice there's a dark kind of patch through it. This is an area where the gravity is so strong that all the light's being pulled away from this area. It doesn't reach us because it's being bent away from us by this gravitational field. Mm-hmm. This is the path that Earth took to get here. That Earth, the water Earth. And then the two Earths were melded together in what we call this the union of the polarity in our books, The Arc of Millions of Years. But the ancients had all kinds of names for this merging of these two worlds, one temporal Earth and one spiritual Earth, or one Earth of rock and metal and another one of water and spirit, and puts them together. Mm. Sort of like the human body, we're this bag of calcium and protein and water, but we're also this animated spirit inside this body that makes it move around and do stuff. Yeah. Earth is the same way. At least this is what the ancients were claiming. And so that's the basis for 44 ancient traditions, not the least of which is Christianity, for sure.
Mm. Okay, so let's say the Catastrophism school, which is, of course, science-based, but they are in line with the ancient claims. Now, let's say they're right, there was some kind of catastrophe. Now, how do we square this with the Hollow Earth? Because I've always thought that if there were, like the ancient reports in the old times, there were permanent seasons. That means that the axis of the Earth hadn't tilted yet. And so you would have like paradise, basically. Yeah. Obviously, you would have permanent winters, at the poles, but then you would have like gradual. Now we know it's not. But then I've been thinking they could also refer to, and we're going to get more into this later, try to conceive how it would be inside the Earth. But let's preconceive that already now and say that there would be gradual seasons also inside the Earth. So that maybe that's what they were referring to. Or it could be both, on the outside once upon a time and now only the inside. And another thing that ties the catastrophism to the Hollow Earth, obviously, is, and maybe you can elaborate on this, is the Egyptian myths. Maybe they're not the only ones, but at least there they're talking about taking refuge inside the Earth to avoid a catastrophe.
Yes, they do. There is a writer. She called herself Om Seti. Her actual English name was Dorothy Eddy. And she claimed to be the reincarnated daughter or reincarnated woman of a virgin who worked at Abydos during the reign of Seti. And so she goes down to Egypt, and she's old already. She's in her late 60s, I think, or maybe early 70s. And she makes contact with a government official who is a former sugar plantation manager. And his name is Hani El-Zani. And she makes the representation to him in her heavy English accent. My name is Dorothy Eddy, but my real name is Om Seti. And I'm from Abydos. I was born there, and I know everything about it. Well, at that time, Abydos was a village, but there was...
What time are we at now?
In the 50s.
Oh, so this is the predecessor of Zahi Hawass.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Carmen Bolter has spoken so well of him.
Well, not
Hawass, of course, but the predecessor.
Right.
Yeah. Go on.
So, Hani El-Zaini is put in charge, because he's a trusted capitalist there in Egypt, to go and find Abydos and try to follow up on the things that Dorothy Eddy is saying. So they go out there, and it's all buried in sand. I mean, people have been living there for, thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And then she says, okay, over here, there's a temple. And underneath the temple, there's another ancient structure called the Osirian, which was here way before Seti got here, and the reason he came here. And over here, there's a wall. And so they started to dig and dig and dig. And lo and behold, everything was right where she said it was. Mm. So they uncovered it, and she began to translate the hieroglyphs into English. Now, these were never published, but I went to Hani El-Zaini's residence in Cairo, and he retrieved the manuscript that Dorothy Eddy had handwritten in her own hand, and I got to open them up and go through them, and you're exactly correct. In the manuscripts, and I took photographs of this myself, the hieroglyphs were translated into English to say that when the Cataclysm came, they escaped into the earth.
In Egypt, or do they move away from Egypt to get into the earth?
Not really sure. It doesn't.
Well, that's interesting, because the most interesting thing for me is the poles things, and we're going to get to that, folks. But there is also, of course, many relations. I mentioned the Tibetans and others talk about caves and caverns where you can find entrances to the inner earth, not just in the poles, but shortcuts or smaller entrances. And to many people, they can't swallow the pole things, the huge openings at the pole, but they can swallow that the earth is hollow in the sense that there's a lot of open pockets and caverns and stuff. That's as far as many people can go, but I think that's actually less likely, because you need a light source, especially if you're going to find civilizations, or, if people are going to escape and live down there.
Well, let's think of it practically.
Yeah.
Let's take the book Edidorfa, which is Aphrodite spelled backwards.
Oh, right.
The thing is that the explorer entered Mammoth Cave, and he walked into the inner earth from Mammoth Cave. So I went to Mammoth Cave myself several times. I spent several summers there.
Where is it?
It's in Kentucky, Edmonson County, Kentucky.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I of course took the tours, but then I also met with the people that actually explore the rest of the cave. And I spoke to one of the individuals who's been as deep, and he's a caver. He gets into these very small areas. He's a spelunker. I said, how deep is the deepest part of the cave? He said, the deepest part of the cave is 360 feet. That's a long way. 360 feet. That's the deepest.
Excuse me, how much is that in meters?
That's about 120 meters.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So obviously the crust has to be a little thicker than that in order.
I would hope so, for our sake.
Right. So the next experiment that was done, or the data that was gathered, was in St. Louis at Washington University. There was the geology department. It was run by a professor named Dr. Y. Sessions. And Dr. Y. Sessions developed a project where he gathered up 600,000 seismograms. These are made by the USGS every time there's a big earthquake on the planet, all of the listening stations around the world can pick up that vibration. And they create a system of seismograms from the source of the earthquake all the way to the other side of the planet. Mm-hmm. And so what he decided to do was take his geology graduate students and computers, and they would go through all these seismograms and they would develop a kind of CAT scan of the Earth. They'd take all these vibrations and they would come up with the image of what the inside of the planet looks like. Mm. And what they developed was a crust that was between 800 and 900 miles thick. Of course, inside this crust is the mantle, and it's moving all the time because of tidal gravity from not only orbit around our sun, but also being tugged on it by the moon and other gravitational forces that are coming through our solar system. So the crust is moving, it's undulating all the time, very small amounts, but still that's a lot of energy. Mm. So then you get in about 800 or 900 miles, all of a sudden there's nothing. It's just, there's no vibrations transferred at all. So we say to ourselves, but that can't be, we're 7,100 miles in diameter. We're 21, almost 22,000 miles in circumference. It can't just be a crust. And in fact, it is not. Other universities were making measurements trying to determine what the core is made of. And two different universities determined that the core of the Earth is made almost entirely of iron. But it's not molten iron. It's crystallized iron. And it exists somewhere between 5,500 and 6,000 degrees C, which means it's the same temperature as the surface of the sun. But it's not hydrogen. It's not a fusion. It's just iron. But at that temperature, iron will glow white hot. It will actually put off photons of light in the white light range.
There are those who say it's a plasma.
No, a plasma is a gas that can conduct electricity. So it could be, but here's the thing. You've got space between the core and the inside of the crust. A lot of space, like maybe over 1,000 miles of space.
But hang on, couldn't that be stone? Or would they get a reading if there was stone? They would get
a reading if there was stone.
They would, yeah, okay. So it has to be vacuum.
Well, there's a couple other pieces of data to consider here. Mm-hmm. The other is the distance the Earth is from the sun and the amount of time it takes the Earth to go around the sun. So we know generally how much the Earth is supposed to weigh. Pretty close, within a few million kilograms. The issue is that Earth is not, given its diameter and what we suspected was its density originally, the Earth is not in the orbit where it's supposed to be. It's off by about 1,200 kilometers. That means that there's a void inside the planet, that the core and the crust make up a set of weight, but there's missing weight. That's what, and once you take away that weight, the Earth is right exactly where it's supposed to be. So that means that you have this core that's rotating and you have a crust that's rotating, and they're rotating on exactly the same axis. But the core is rotating much faster than the crust. And so this counter rotation is what creates the magnetosphere around our planet and a rush of magnetic energy that goes out of our planet on the north and the south and illuminates the ionosphere in what we call the Borealis, one over the North Pole and one over the South Pole.
Yeah, and according to, actually I'm going to ask you about that later, about the Borealis, but I want to move a little bit back to the ancients, because we see that these myths, they're not going away, and even up to when modern time starts with the industrial age and stuff, we see many of these myths coming out in the popular literature. For example, we all know about Jules Verne, right, and his journey to the center of the Earth.
Sure.
But we have another chap, there were many of those, but one I want to promote a little is from my hometown in Bergen. His name is Ludwig Holberg. He was very famous back in the day, and he went to a cavern, which is actual. This is a story. He went into that cavern, and allegedly he meditated there and came back after some time. And then he wrote the book Niels Klim's Strange Journeys. And that's a story about a chap who goes into that exact cave, which I've been in.
Superb.
And he, after a long while, he comes to the inner civilization. So we have this claim of a civilization. It doesn't go away. By the way, me and a fellow, many years ago, went to explore. We had breathing equipment like the divers have. We were dead set to find out what he had seen, right? Uh-huh. And what do you know? After a while, what do we see? Bar, is that what you say? Like you have in prison?
Oh, really?
Yes, you can't enter. It's so typical.
Well, if we think about it practically, if you were to say you wanted to walk from where you live to 900 miles away on flat ground,
yeah,
it would take you probably a couple of months to make that walk of 900 miles, maybe more. If you're
how many meters are we talking about here?
Well, 900 miles would be about
kilometers.
Probably about pretty close to 2,000 kilometers.
Okay, I see.
It's a long,
I see.
so it'll take you time to
that's a long, yeah.
But that's flat ground. If you were on a 45-degree angle, which is very steep, I mean, you walk on a 45-degree angle for 20 minutes, your legs are going to be burning like fire. Yeah. But if you were to walk at 45 degrees, now you've increased that distance from 900 miles or from 2,000 kilometers to pretty close to 3,000 kilometers. That's even further. In order to walk that distance, you would have to have a caravan of supplies, light, food, water, medicine. You'd have to have a change of socks. There's no way you could make it. It would take an army to walk that far.
To get to the inner, absolute inner, yes. But at some point you could get so far that you realize there is a journey ahead of you. That's the interesting bit, you know.
Right.
And I think when we see these reports of people who have encountered, because one of the few books I found about the Hollow Earth, and this was before I knew about you too. There's so much crap out there, but I did find two interesting books by a chap called Eric Norman. He published back in the 60s, and he gave, you may be familiar with him, but he gave a fairly decent, I would say, account of the story. But the one is called This Hollow Earth, the other one is called The Underground People or something like that, Underworld People. And that brings me back to the myths and the legends, because we have a lot of them here in Norway. You know, trolls and what I could just translate as dwarfs. Not all is translatable. We have something called nisse.
Oh.
And many of these people were underground people, you know, and they came up and they abducted women, for example. We have, for example, you know, this famous tune.
The Peer Gynt Suite.
Exactly. And that's about the king of the mountain.
The Hall Mountain King.
Exactly, yes. So we have that ingrained. My grandfather, who was an atheist, he was like a union worker man, like he was a miner. Okay? Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't hear anything about religion or fantasy or anything, but he swore. And he was a miner. And nobody in his family believed him, except for me. Because I could see he wasn't kidding. He wasn't a humorous guy at all. Uh-huh. But he swore he had encountered what we call nisse, which are these creatures from the earth. So I'm thinking maybe you don't even have to go all the way to the center to get to, you know, Agartha, whatever. Maybe you would find something already before you get that far that could confirm that something is going on. That's all I'm saying. That's my suggestion. Thoughts?
Well, there is a lot of evidence. I mean, somebody asked me one time, do you think there's, you know, advanced civilizations inside the planet? Yeah. And I said, look, you're really accessing the little boy in me, because, you know, I read comic books too, but when you start looking at the science and you look at Weissession's work and you say, not only did he find this void, but they also discovered another ocean underneath the crust as big as the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
They picked up the waves crashing on the shore inside the planet.
Jeez.
So I said, and I have said this several times before, if there is a void inside the planet, there most certainly will be life there. That's the way life works on Earth. Mm. Is it microbial or is it more advanced like a fish or a dinosaur or a bird? It's hard to say. Is it more advanced like another kind of civilization that can't take radiation from the sun, but they can take light from another source, maybe an innocuous one like an iron-based light?
Yeah.
And I would say, based on the space exploration that we've done, that for at least 1,000 light years in every direction, there's no other planet like Earth anywhere. Living on the surface of a planet is not common. It's not the way you would normally exist out there, in the galaxy. And there are other examples, even in our own solar system, of two planets existing in one sphere. We just recently learned this year, we just looked at the data of the planet Uranus. Uranus is a planet in our solar system that's way more tilted than Earth. Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees on its axis, but Uranus is tilted almost 90 degrees. It's really got a terrible orientation on its axis. And we always wondered about that. But now we know because of the probes that we've sent out there and the measurements that we've taken, which take decades and decades to gather enough information. Uranus was actually struck by another planet. And that planet is currently inside of Uranus.
Wow.
It's inside there. We can see the thermal signature of this other world inside that world.
Is that why Uranus is spinning so weird, backwards or something?
Yes, exactly. So it's not a crazy assumption that Earth at one time was maybe straight up and down on its axis. If it did have a winter, it wasn't much of one. You had pretty much a temperature equilibrium because there's no spring, there's no summer, there's no winter. It's the same all the time. And then now Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees on its axis. But it doesn't take much more than a 9-year-old to look at the average globe to see that all of the continents easily fit together on all sides.
Including Antarctica.
Yeah, including Antarctica, which means that Earth, in order for that to really be true, Earth would have to be about 1/3 its present size in diameter.
Yeah, under expanding Earth theory.
Right, exactly. And the Earth is still expanding. We're still seeing it expand.
So you subscribe to that?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
So it's expanding at a much slower rate now because the crust has slowed way down. But when it was 1/3 its present size, it was spinning, of course, 3 times faster.
So, but what you said now, rewind a little, it blew my mind because I just realized it's the way you framed it too. It really, I'm pretty sure many who listened realized the same thing if they haven't thought about it before. And that's that. If there is life on other planets, not just in the Goldilocks zone, we're thinking very conventionally outside of the planet. If everyone has an inner sun, there could be basically life on every physical planet.
Sure.
On this solar system and in every other solar system, which means already, if you discount that, if you just think about the Goldilocks zone, there's still innumerable planets with lives. They have a number, I don't remember what it was, but it's so much that it's just even the most materialist, conventional minded person acknowledges that yes, there is intelligent life out there. But when you now suggest this with potential life inside a planet due to the inner sun and all that, Mars every planet in our Pluto even. That really makes the universe a much smaller place than we thought.
Well, much more of a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the gravity on the inside of a planet, just go by Newton's mathematics, the closer you get to the center of a planet, the less the gravity becomes.
That's so weird.
When we look at the Kepler program is out there looking at exoplanets, and when we see one that is quote unquote Earth-like, that is to say it has liquid water on the surface, and we think, oh, it could support life. It's also 3 to 5 times larger in mass than our Earth, which means if I went to that planet and tried to stand up, I would weigh about 475 pounds. I couldn't move out of my own shadow. I'd be crushed. But on the inside of that planet, gravity might be much milder, much more easy to manage.
Yeah, and in part 2, I'm going to ask you to account for how we visualize the gravity condition inside.
Okay.
I want to say about the oceans you said, I think it's 2 Japanese scientists discovered also that there is more ocean under our oceans than over. And what I'm thinking is, of course, they're not necessarily thinking a hollow earth kind of thing, but although they are already there, I have to acknowledge there's some hollow phenomenon going on. But if it's really, the inner oceans they are onto, then they have to have gone through, there had to be some kind of earth between our oceans and those oceans. So maybe they're just measuring at the thinnest. How thick do the hollow earth paradigm imagine that? Is it the crust is the word, the earth between ours and theirs?
The crust, according to the seismological imaging that we've done, is between 800 and 900 miles thick. But I have to throw a cautionary note in here. These measurements were all made below the 50th parallel. So all of the data was gathered below the 50th parallel. We do not have seismological data above the 60th, the 70th, the 80th parallel. We don't really have an image of that. There's not much knowledge known. And when we look at, satellites going over the Earth, and believe me, I've looked at probably more than 30,000 images of the Earth from space, from weather satellites. The poles, the areas that we're talking about exploring, they're constantly covered with clouds. They're never clear. Mm-hmm. It's where the atmospheric river is moving billions of gallons of water around our planet, but it is in an area where that becomes a thick vapor, and you can't see through it.
No, and the few pictures they do release actually shows what can only be called holes.
Well, I mean, you have to understand the way satellites take images. They don't take a picture of the entire planet. They're not far enough up. They're only a few hundred miles. So they take a strip picture. Yeah. And then what they do is they patch the strips together to make a whole image.
Yes, it becomes a black circle. But that's not the one I'm referring to. I'm referring to 2 different things. One is, I think it's from... was it Apollon? It was one of these astronaut photo from one of the astronaut missions. The other I'm thinking of, which is very frequent, I can send you some if you like, but you're probably aware, is the aurora, and there's a rare clarity, and there's a black hole.
Oh,
not very clear. You have to look for it at the same spot all the time in the center.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking. And so it's kind of under clouds, it's under the aurora, but you can still see it.
Interesting. Well, we've got a couple of exoplanet photographs.
Yeah.
One is from one of the old rovers on Mars after it lost its ability to drive around. The camera still worked. The solar panel would have enough energy to energize the camera. So the rover can't drive around, but it can take pictures. So Caltech runs this project, and the guy at Caltech that runs it, his name was Dr. Jim Bell. I don't know who's inherited it since then. But one of the experiments that they did after they took pictures all the way around it, which was nothing really interesting around the probe, they tilted the camera all the way back so they could take pictures of the sky. And started taking pictures of the night sky. And of course, you know, Mars has a gigantic orbit. The closest it gets to Earth is about 37 million miles, but it goes a long ways away. It goes like close to 57 million miles away on the far side, visible from Earth. So it's on the close side. It's at night. It's clear. And guess what it catches in its camera? A picture of Earth with the moon around it, all the way from Mars, like 38 million miles away. Of course, they blew the image up, and it's a little fuzzy, but you can see Earth and you can see its moon around it. The second image was much more stunning, and it is a very recent photograph that was taken by the Chinese probe that is orbiting the moon. It has been taking high-resolution pictures of the surface of the moon for a long time, and they've stitched these together, and we've got some of the data. I don't think they're sharing all of it with us, but one of the pictures that it recently took was of Earth from the moon. You can see the horizon of the moon, and then over the horizon you can see Earth 250,000 miles away. It's probably the best picture we have of our planet actually, you know, in space.
And did we see something at the poles?
Unfortunately, you can't see the poles from the moon. The moon is not a polar orbit.
But speaking of the freak that is the moon, and we're not even going to touch all the moon anomalies because then we'll be sitting here for a week. But that has been said to ring like a bell too. I mean, people commonly regard that as hollow. But would you think if it's, I mean, it may be artificial for all we know, but if it's natural, it should have these weird curves at the poles, suggesting maybe some kind of hole going on. Have you seen anything like that? Do you know?
No, we did two experiments. One was the Elcon experiment, which I think was in 2006. The Elcon experiment, we had a probe that was orbiting the moon, and on the probe was about 1,000 kilogram weight, just a slug. No. And the experiment was that once this probe got over the pole, because we could see the poles of the moon from Earth sideways, that is to say, we can look across them. We can't look down on it, but we can look across it. So we have a spectrometer, a spectrographic telescope. We're looking at the moon. We drop the slug on the pole of the moon. It strikes the surface. Of course, it blows a huge amount of material up from the impact. And we take a spectrographic image of the dust and the stuff that it blows up into the air. And what we discovered from that is there's a tremendous amount of water locked into the soil of the moon. But there's also a tremendous amount of what's called helium-3, which exists on Earth, but very rarely. Most of the helium we have on the Earth is helium-4, or it's, you know, a gas that we use to inflate balloons. But helium-3 is very energetic. That is to say, its decay can be managed very easily, and there's a tremendous amount of energy in very little mass of those two protons. So it's helium-3 is something we really could use as energy. That was exciting to everyone. But the other thing that was discovered is on the moon, there are these volcanic vents. I mean, we say they're volcanic vents. They're awfully perfectly round. I mean, really round, which is not the way a volcanic vent would look. A volcanic vent would look a little bit like an axe cut in the ground. It would look like a gash. No, these are really round. And they're about 300 to 400 meters across. They're rather large. and they go back into the crust about 15 kilometers. Now, there's nothing coming out of them. So if there is any volcanic activity on the moon, it was a long time ago. And many people, and I'm one of them, were writing papers and idea suggestions that we take over one of those openings, one of those volcanic openings, and seal it up. It wouldn't take much material at all. We could put a 3D printer up there and we could print a cap for it.
Jeez, wow.
Take a couple of years to do, but it would run on its own on sunlight. But you could seal it up, and then you would have an environment inside the moon where a base could be built. You wouldn't have to worry about meteorites or solar flares or any of that stuff. And maybe once you seal it up, maybe some of that water can be turned into oxygen, and you can actually create an environment on the inside of the moon. Now, you say it ring like a bell. That when the first missions to the moon went, one of the things the astronauts were trained to do as scientific experiments is to place seismometers, just like we have on Earth, seismometers on the moon with transmitters on them, because we were trying to see if there's any kind of seismic activity on the moon. And so when the Eagle lifted off the moon, it burned up all the fuel that it had in the can, and then it just jettisoned the base, which probably only weighed a few hundred pounds in that gravity. But it fell back to the moon as the Eagle was going out and achieving orbit and linking up with the ship that was going to come back to Earth. That can, the empty fuel can, fell back to the planet. And when it struck, the seismometers on the moon picked up the vibration. And when it hit the ground, now they thought, okay, well, fine, it makes a big thud when it hits the ground, except that the crust rang for 2 hours. 2 hours they saw that vibration.
Can't you tell a lot about the interior of the moon when it rings for 2 hours?
No. I mean, I wish you could. We if we had seismometers all over the planet and we did it again, then we could do the same thing we do on the Earth. We could do that CAT scan and tell what's on the inside. Okay. But the fact that aluminum can, which probably didn't weigh but just a few hundred pounds empty, that it struck the Earth or struck the moon and made that kind of signal had made people scratch their heads for 60 years.
So fragile little thing too. Hey, we're halfway. We're gonna take a break, but I want you to share with us one more tidbit before we take that break. Okay. Because I will still say this belongs to the myth domain, and that's to the Nazis. Now we know they were, many of them at least, were deeply into the Hollow Earth, but their take on it was so weird. They thought we were living inside the Hollow Earth, and that if they found the entrances, they could. But I have no idea how they imagine it would look like, because when we look out there, we see space, we see stars, right? And they would probably think something similar must. Where does that come from? How can you even explain such a weird version if it's not weird enough already? How is this rationalized?
The one thing that we do know about the early Nazis is they had a lot of money. They had money pouring in from all over the world, different industrialists that were pouring money in there.
Yeah. And what they didn't have, they took.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. They went out and took gold and collectibles, and they explored everywhere. They went to Africa, they went to Asia, and one of the places that they went was Tibet. You mentioned Tibet earlier. I don't know any other Westerner that has been to Tibet and has been able to get underneath the Patala into the ground, underground levels under the Patala. It was a pure fluke that I was able to get under there, because it was all locked up. And I asked the Chinese guard, if I could get in, and my Tibetan guide said, don't ask him again. You can ask him one time, but if you ask him again, you got to make him mad. So I asked, and he shook his head no. And so I said, okay, fine. So I started walking away. And a couple minutes later, he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, yeah, come back. I'll open the door. You can go down there. And so he let us in.
And you didn't have to pay him?
No, we unchained the door and down we went. And when we walked down the stairs, which I don't know if anybody'd walked down those stairs in maybe 30, 40 years. But we got down to the bottom. Of course, it was pitch black, so we turned our lights on. On the floor, in the stone of the floor, was this gigantic swastika. It was maybe 4 meters across. And in the center of it was a big piece of turquoise, probably, I don't know, maybe 20 centimeters across. Pretty good sized piece of turquoise. So I asked my guide, because this is built in the 7th century, 646 A.D., way, way, way before the Nazis. I said, what the heck? What is that swastika doing on the floor? And it's so old. He said, well, that's not a swastika. That's actually the Milky Way galaxy. They knew about the Milky Way galaxy in the 7th century.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the Nazis discovered it, and maybe that's where they got the swastika in the first place, was from these ancient traditions. And, of course, they turned it into their symbol of whatever you want to call Nazism. But that symbol has existed for a long, long time. But that wasn't the remarkable thing. The remarkable thing was what I photographed beside it. Right beside it, going up about 25, maybe 28 feet, maybe close to 10 meters, was a magnificent gold structure. And it was covered in gems. And I took a picture of it. I got the picture out. I was stopped at LAX by a man in a black uniform, and he went through all my pictures, and he didn't see that one. He didn't delete it, so I got it. I kept it.
Excellent.
But they call this a stupa, and the stupa is used by their tradition to transport the soul of a Panchen Lama through a stargate, through 4-dimensional stargate to another dimension. And the stargate is painted on the ceiling above this thing. But the remarkable thing is, I told my guide, you know what this really looks like? It looks like a Tesla coil. And so sure enough, I got back to the States, dug up an archive photograph, and it matched perfectly. So I thought to myself, now wait a minute. The ancient Tibetan Buddhists saw this image. They had this vision, and they built this thing out of gold with gems on it. And they even had stylized lightning coming out of the top of it. Nikola Tesla had exactly the same vision, except he decided to interpret this dream and build a Tesla coil. His was electric, theirs was artistic.
Spiritual.
But it was the same thing.
Yeah. But they do have stories that you could, some monasteries are saying that they had entrances to the inner earth through these monasteries. And you were allowed pretty far down. Were you all the way to the end, or? No,
it's only a couple hundred feet, and then you're to the ground. But we were already at 11,500 feet, so it's a...
Yeah, you went even back down in the earth.
There's no air, let me tell you. There's no air. But then we went across the Tibetan plateau because it was the dry season. No ice had melted, so the riverbeds were dry. And we went way, way up one of the riverbeds to an old monastery. It's over 1,000 years old. And we spent the day up there talking to them and trying to get them to tell us about Shambhala or some place, where we could access at least the legend of the Hollow Earth. I think you can only get there this month. It was in April. You can only get there in the month of April because before then it's too bloody cold. It's 20 below zero all the time. And after that, it's flooded because the ice and glacier melts a little bit and that riverbed is full of water. So it was really the only time we could go up there. It's isolated from the world the rest of the time. I will tell you, I wish I could have spent another couple of weeks up there. But truthfully, it's about all I could take physically. And I was in really good shape. I stayed in the gym for 6 weeks to get ready to go on this expedition. And when I got back, I needed to sleep for like 5 days. It was tremendously physically draining, this expedition.
Yeah, but you knew what you were going to. That's great. But again, what about the Nazi paradigm that we're living inside the hollow earth? Do you know how that can be explained even theoretically?
No, I really don't.
It's very weird, isn't it? It's like an inverse hollow earth hypothesis. Okay, I'll not bother you with that then. We'll take that break now, and I'll bother you with the mainstream hollow earth theory when we come back. We're going to discuss it. We're going to see if we can make some kind of argument for it within a scientific paradigm.
Okay.
So don't go anywhere, people. We'll be right back.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.